here's the deal. There's a few players right now that no one wants. Some analysts are even calling these players avoids, which is dropping them down draft boards. And now this opens up the advantage to you because they're now values. So these are 7 players that nobody wants, but you should in 2023. And let's begin with Russell Wilson, who I know he was not great last year, but there's a lot we have to unpack here and you might be surprised. Now the part that won't surprise you is that Russell Wilson wasn't great last year. He actually had career lows in a lot of categories, starting with his accuracy. He was 33rd overall after guys like Davis Mills, who was in charge of the worst strength offense last year. And Wilson also experienced his worst season in fantasy points per game. He was the quarterback 18 overall and had just 16 touchdowns, by far a career low. However, we must discuss the following. Wilson basically dealt with injuries all season last year. I mean, look at these injuries. Starting in October 2nd, so like 2 to 3 weeks into the year, he has a shoulder injury. Then just 2 weeks later, he has a hamstring tear, which he plays for then the final 75% of the year. And that's not it, because as the season goes on, he continues to get a concussion and a knee sprain. So he's injuring his shoulder, tearing his hamstring, has a concussion and a knee injury. Of course, this is going to be not as great of a year for Wilson. And then it doesn't help that Russ played behind a bottom 10 offensive line last year. Russell Wilson ranked 6th last year in how many times he was pressured per dropback. About 38% of his dropbacks, more than 1 out of every 3, he was getting pressured on. But now the good news for this year is that Russ is currently healthy and the Broncos offensive line has had a massive upgrade. Because as you can see right here, just from their top 2 free agency signings, a Mike McGlinchey from San Francisco, nearly $88 million deal, and Ben Powers from Baltimore, $52 million deal, they had about $140 million on their offensive line this offseason. And according to Pro Football Focus, who has been very consistent and accurate in ranking offensive lines year to year, they have the Denver Broncos being the most improved, moving up 10 spots from where they finished last year at 21st to being a borderline top 10 offensive line this year, which of course is going to help Russell Wilson. And now Denver didn't stop there, because they also ended up trading for Sean Payton, which they traded a good amount for, a draft pick, a first-round draft pick. And now this matters because 83% of Payton's teams have finished top 10 in offense. And if you're going to get a guy like Sean Payton, who you give up a first-round pick for, and he's had this great success in the past with offenses, if he does that this year, it's going to lead to even more success for Wilson. So your takeaway is that Russ is now healthy with a much better situation around him. And the fact that he now goes as the quarterback 17 outside the top 100 picks, the lowest he's gone in over 5 years of fantasy, yeah, it makes him a must, and so is this next RB. And that man's name is Damien Harris. The former New England Patriot has now moved to the division rival in the Buffalo Bills. You can currently get Damien Harris right now as the running back 41, the latest he's gone in about 2 to 3 years, as the 115th player off the board, and he's actually going from an upgrade from Mac Jones to Josh Allen. Now let's discuss this, because Harris is primed to see some key touches in Buffalo, most likely in the red zone. And now there's a few big reasons for this. The first one is just his overall size. He's 5'10 and 216 pounds. 216 pounds is 17 pounds more than the other running back on this roster, James Cook, giving him more leverage in the red zone. And according to PFF, he's the second best running back in touchdowns per touch since 2021, which shows his ability to turn red zone touches into touchdowns. But that's not all, because there's not a whole lot of competition in terms of red zone touches in this backfield. I mean, the guys who you're going to see out there, maybe a James Cook, maybe a Latavius Murray. As for James Cook, the second-year player was great per touch last year, but he's undersized, and even in college, he doesn't have a lot of experience as a red zone or goal line back. He's about 17 to 20 pounds smaller than Damien Harris. He's going to be behind him there. And then you have Latavius Murray, who's going to turn 34 years old this season. There's a good chance that he's actually cut before the season even starts. He only got like $1 million this offseason, and he's been nowhere near efficient at the goal line and red zone, according to PFF, than Damien Harris. And of course, there's also a mobile quarterback in this backfield in Josh Allen. And Josh Allen last year was top 3 in red zone carries amongst quarterbacks, so he was used often in the red zone and got some touchdowns on the ground. He had 26 total red zone carries. But there's a chance that we actually see that drop this year. Maybe this is why they've signed some bigger backs in Damien Harris, who's been efficient and reliable in the red zone, and Latavius Murray as well, who's a little bit of a bigger back, because last year, as you can see here, Josh Allen ended up tearing his elbow. He got banged up on some runs as well last year. Maybe they want to slow that down a little bit. And I even think that Harris can earn more than just red zone touches. Heck, he could be the full-time starter. Since 2020, Harris ranks 7th in PFF rushing grade and efficiency, ahead of guys like Alvin Kamara and James Conner, who are taken far ahead of him in drafts. Which is strange, because Harris is now joining the number 3 overall offense from last season, and they ran the 6th most red zone plays, which sets up nicely for Harris to beat his current ADP and finish as a top 30 running back. So take Harris and then take this next value wide receiver, and that would be the new Dallas Cowboy and Brandon Cooks. Look, there's no way to sugarcoat this. Last year, Cooks wasn't great. He was 37th in wide receiver fantasy points per game, which outside of an injury season, this was his worst year, scoring just 3 touchdowns overall. And his receiving efficiency actually dropped by 17%. Right here, his yards per route run, they dropped by 17%. This was a 5-year low for Cooks. Now, on first glance, you might say, oh, an aging wide receiver, he's had concussion problems in the past, maybe he's just falling off. But I'd argue it's very hard to blame Cooks for his inefficiency last year, because Cooks played in by far the worst offense last year when it comes to yards per play and efficiency in the Houston Texans. His quarterback, Davis Mills, was 31st in accuracy last year after some other guys who ended up getting benched at one point in the season in Carson Wentz and Marcus Mariota. Now, what does this mean? Well, you have a bad offense, you have an inefficient quarterback, it's going to lead to bad overall targets. And that's what happened for Cooks. Last year, his catchable targets ranked 84th in the NFL. This means 30% of his targets weren't catchable, which translates to 64 of his targets not being catchable. But now Cooks joins the Dallas Cowboys in Dak Prescott, who in his 12 healthy starts last year was top 10 in quarterback efficiency, a much better upgrade than Davis Mills and the Texans last year. Now, here's the thing. There's no doubt about it that Cooks is going to be the number 2 option on this team. Of course, it's CeeDee Lamb who's the wide receiver 1 on this team, so your expectations should be dropped heading into this year for Cooks, meaning that his 2021 season when he had 133 targets probably shouldn't be in your range of outcomes for this year unless something happens to CeeDee Lamb. We hope it doesn't. But that's all fine and good because this year we aren't paying the price for that type of volume. You see, Cooks goes as the 99th overall player and often falls outside the top 100 players as the wide receiver 43 in drafts. And this is despite not having too much competition outside of CeeDee Lamb. Like, the other receivers on this team behind him are Michael Gallup, Kevontae Turpin, and Dennis Houston. For starters, Gallup last year ranked 91st in wide receiver efficiency amongst receivers. Yeah, he was coming off of an injury, but he really hasn't been all that good in 2 to 2.5 years. And then there's Kevontae Turpin, only 2 targets in his career because he was mainly a special teams ace and captain last year. And then you have Dennis Houston, an undrafted free agent from last year, just 2 catches for 16 yards. So as you can see, there's no competition here. Even at tight end, Dalton Schultz left the team, and they're left now with guys like Jake Ferguson. So you want to consider Cooks, who, look, I don't think he's going to finish top 10, but he has upside where he goes, and then get this next receiver. And that man's name is going to be a veteran that I see is probably one of the biggest avoids right now in fantasy. But yes, I believe now, based on where he's falling, he is a value in Mike Evans. Look, there's no way to beat around this one. He's going to be turning 30 in August, which is a little bit older for a receiver, and that's not great, of course. But when it comes to aging wide receivers, you want to see what they were doing the previous years. Were they still efficient? If that's the case, well, there's no indication of a drop-off. And last year, Mike Evans, for his team, depending on the site you look at, PFF has him at 133 targets. Some teams have him at 128, depending on how you chart it. Either way, he saw a lot of targets last year, over 125. And that number is significant because over the last 4 years, it's the most targets he's had in a single season, 128. He was starting to downgrade in terms of his ability to earn targets. It increased last year. And this has led to Evans still being an elite producer. He was the 13th overall wide receiver in fantasy points per game last year, despite scoring just 6 touchdowns, which is his lowest since 2017. If that rises, well, he's going to have even more of a floor heading into 2023. Now, the reason why Evans goes in round 6 of fantasy drafts is because of his quarterback. There's no more Tom Brady in Tampa Bay because the Bucs signed Baker Mayfield earlier this offseason to a 1-year deal worth $8.5 million. And Baker wasn't all that great last year. He was 35th in quarterback accuracy. Out of 40 total graded quarterbacks, he was 35th. But as we talked about in other videos, he was behind one of the worst offensive lines last year in the Rams that didn't have a Cooper Kupp out there. That was their number 1 receiver for a lot of the year, was like a Van Jefferson. But this could actually be a sneaky fit, Baker and Evans, and here's why. Evans was 3rd at earning deep targets last year, and Mayfield was 6th in deep ball accuracy. So your takeaway is that Baker still loves to use his big arm, so consider Evans in this next RB. And that RB will be the Atlanta Falcons running back Tyler Algier. Now look, I know they drafted a running back, and as many people have indicated, this is the best running back since Saquon Barkley and potentially since Adrian Peterson and Bijan Robinson, who they drafted with not just a 1st-round pick, no, a top 10 pick. And trust me, I know how good Bijan Robinson is, and if you don't, well, let's discuss a tiny bit. Last year, Bijan Robinson led every single running back in college football in broken tackle rate, and he was able to produce off of those broken tackles and more. He had over 1,500 rushing yards, over 300 receiving yards, nearly 1,900 total yards last year, and he had 20 touchdowns. So Bijan's a fantastic player. Those stats kind of prove that and make it obvious for you, but Tyler Algier doesn't mean he's not valuable. Because last year, Tyler Algier was taken in the early 5th round of the draft. He's out of BYU by the Falcons. And as a 5th-round rookie, he went over 1,000 rushing yards, and with his receiving yards, he put up nearly 1,200 total yards. And not only that, he was top 20 in running back efficiency. So yeah, he saw a lot of opportunities, but he was efficient on those touches. And this matters because it shows if anything happens to Bijan, Algier can handle the entire and full workload. Now, despite this, he goes as the running back 43 in drafts after guys like Tank Bigsby and Devon Achane, who honestly, I don't think if something happened to the starter that they'd be the full down, every down workload running back like a Tyler Algier would be. So consider Algier in your drafts, and then consider this next asset. And that asset would be the fantasy blueprint, the 2023 fantasy blueprint, which the question here, if you want to win your league, well, this is going to be for you. Now, the blueprint will have everything you need to win your league, all the tools and analysis, like our top 255 rankings and tiers right here. Tyler Algier, he's my 129th player. I have him 22 spots ahead of where he often and on average goes. Now, if you want to get this blueprint and join the thousands of other people, yes, thousands who have already obtained it, well, just click the link in the description below and follow the 2 simple steps. And to make this even more of a no-brainer for you, it's it's only $5 for the entire year. All the way up until week 17, you'll get analysis for into your fantasy playoffs. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, well, I'll just refund that $5 payment, making this completely free and risk-free. So to get access to your 2023 fantasy blueprint and join the countless others who already have that access, just click the link in the description below. And then you want to also grab the tight end that nobody wants right now, but you should, and that's going to be Jelani Woods. Now, Woods is somebody you could just take with your last pick in the draft because he often goes as the tight end 34, 244th overall, which means most of the time he's not even being drafted. And here's what you need to know about Jelani. According to the player profile or workout metrics, I mean, this is one of the most, if not the most athletic tight end of all time. His speed, 94th percentile, burst, 95th percentile, catch radius, 98th percentile. This is all really good. And it's even better when you consider that he's 6'7" and over 250 pounds with those types of metrics. Now, Jelani was solid as a rookie. He was top 15 in yards per route run. The average rookie tight end is outside the top 30. And now I really want you to check this out because when he got opportunity last year, he delivered. Here's Jelani's routes. Let's focus on this column right here. You can see early on as a rookie tight end with like 2 other tight ends on the team seeing touches. Yeah, he's only getting 4 routes. That's how many times he's out there running a route. 11. But here, 21 routes. We scroll a little more. 24 routes, even more, 25 routes. He ran 20 plus routes in 3 games last year. And now in those 3 games, Jelani Woods averaged 12 points on 5.7 targets, which would rank top 5 amongst tight ends in 2022. So simply put, take Jelani Woods with your last pick and then get this next wide receiver. And that receiver's name is Rondale Moore, the Arizona wide receiver who is now easily, at least the bare minimum, their wide receiver 2 with DeAndre Hopkins gone to Tennessee. Now this dude, Rondale Moore, was breaking out in 2022 before a season-ending injury. Let's discuss. Last year, Rondale Moore played 80% of the snaps, but if you take out the game that he actually got hurt in, so his snaps got cut short in that one, he actually saw 94% of his snaps in games he started and completed. But it wasn't just his snaps that increased from the previous year where he only saw like 50% to 60% of the snaps. No, it was also his production. Because from week 5 to week 10 last year, Rondale averaged 14.1 fantasy points on 8.5 targets per game. During this time, Rondale Moore was actually a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy football, ahead of guys like AJ Brown, who often go in the first or second round of fantasy right now. Now, everything was going great for Rondale. He was probably going to finish as a top 25 guy last year, but then the injuries hit. And it kind of sucked because they hit all over the place. They hit to start the year in September. He kind of missed the first month or so of the season, so he had a slow start, but then he started breaking out. But then in November, he ends up leaving a game early. He has a groin strain, and then a hand dislocation ends his year just 5 days later on November 26th. Now, of course, the quarterback situation for him right now is murky and confusing. And whenever that's the case, it means it's not a great quarterback situation. Kyler Murray can miss, according from all the Twitter doctors right now, anywhere from 2 to maybe even 8+ weeks. And then after Kyler, there's not a lot of guys to get all that excited about, from Colt McCoy, Jeff Driscoll, Clayton Tune, a rookie, or David Blau. But the nice thing is that Colt McCoy seems like he's actually going to be ready to start the year, at least as of right now. And I'll take the veteran presence who's been in this system in Colt McCoy and has had success. I mean, last year, DeAndre Hopkins was averaging like nearly 100 yards a game with Colt McCoy because look, McCoy's at least accurate. 68% completion last year, well above average, 75% the year before that. We'll take this out of Colt McCoy if he is the guy we have to deal with for half the year before Murray is healthy. And all of this to me makes Rondale Moore a fantastic value in drafts. He often goes in the 13th or 14th round in drafts. I think he should be taken within the first 10 rounds. He goes to the wide receiver 60. I think there's a case for him to be made to be a top 36 receiver. So these are the players that nobody wants, but you should in fantasy this year. Maybe they'll even be league winners. Now, speaking of league winners, if you want to see the top 10 in ranking order must-have running backs for 2023, well, check out this lovely video right over here. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all the info that will help you schmack around and beat your buddies this year.